stuff anymore. So instead of saying 1 through 7s, when really all that was getting recycled truly was number 1s, number 2s, and number 5s, no one wanted to say that because every hauler, it's a competitive market. There's slim margins in the waste world. And that was their way, like, we can recycle more. We are more environmentally friendly. That's how we get your business. Versus saying, you know what, your 6s, your 4s, your 3s, your 7s, they're just taking a ride in the truck. They're going to get scooped up to another truck. They're taking the scenic route to the landfill is really what they're doing, is what we usually say to that. And that's really sad. So we are trying to be transparent, especially in Dunn County. We'll say, we'll take your number 1s, your number 2s, your number 5s. And that's what we're going to take. That's what we have markets on. That's what we know will get recycled. The rest of it isn't going to get recycled. And we really ask you, if you are going to purchase it or you have that, throw it away at home. If you take it a step further, can you potentially not buy it in the first place? Then you don't have to worry about throwing it away or the disposal part. But that is, as we've mentioned, sometimes impossible, especially if you are wanting fresh strawberries year round. It's tough. Plastic is everywhere. And I think the thing that I get a question a lot when documentaries like this are made of, well, but what about our plastics in Dunn County? Are they all getting recycled? It says that only, 5% of the world's plastic is getting recycled. And, I can assure you that your number 1s, your number 2s, your number 5s, your plastic film, that's all getting recycled. We have to think in the broader plastic realm of the plastic wrapping on all of your, groceries that you're getting at home, your, pre-washed salad bags and things of that nature. That all counts as plastic in the overall plastic percentage. So when you think about that and all the different types of plastic, the plastic around toys, or children's toys, that kind of stuff, it's everywhere. You can have plastic twine around bales of hay that farmers use. You have egg plastic that they use to wrap their hay bales in. There's all sorts of plastic in every industry, which makes it really, really tough on the recycling end, because it's manufactured so differently, or they make multi-layers of different types of plastic, which makes it just impossible for us to even know what it is or how we could potentially even recover it, which makes it tough.
That really reminds me of the striking change that's happened, right? Like silage. Mm-hmm. There was a period where they were selling the metal silos to scrap, because the steel was so valuable, and they were just running with the tube silage on the ground, and it just that is everything, where it's gone from, we had a way we used to do it that was sustainable, and now we have a way of doing it that uses huge volumes of plastic that is just trash when it's done. I interact a lot with the industrial designers at Stout, and I met some Russians this year who were involved in a lot of plastic applications, 3D printing, and all of these things. And they made a really good point around plastic, that it's really when it's used inappropriately that it's a problem. That plastic, the things that were said originally about plastic, of it being a miracle material, are true. And to vilify it wholesale is problematic. You have to put the blame where it belongs, which is that the single-use plastic. But you also have to be really careful and remember why we went to these single-use plastics. The plastic bag is that excellent example. It was done because we were using too many resources on paper bags. Paper bags are extremely resource intense, and this was coming at a point where we were cutting down all the forests for paper production, and so then we did plastic bags, and they were supposed to be reusable. They are reusable, and then we just started not reusing them, and so it's always where there's this brilliant thing, and then it just sidelines off into our classic human foibles. We're just, we evolved to be a lazy animal. We benefit. We're here because we're lazy. It's one of our biggest advantages. Why waste energy if you don't have to? And it's unfortunately killing us now.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show, especially when talking about the co-op and people not wanting to purchase in bulk, it just goes to show the successfulness of the marketing campaigns that these big companies putting out single-use plastics, like, the American Chemical Association or whatnot. They have these great marketing campaigns that just make everything look so beautiful, like everything these companies are doing is for the consumer, when really it's drowning us in this waste that we don't even need. The American dream is not in the stuff that we purchase, but the freedom that we have to utilize. And what I really liked about the film was what they were doing in India is they were doing these brand audits where they have a test run zero waste community that they are then collecting all those single-use plastic, like those plastic chip bags, things that can't be recycled, things that are multi-filmed, layered of plastic and aluminum and paper even. And they have those brand audits, and then they take those top brands that are producing the most single-use plastic waste that cannot be recycled, bringing that to the government and asking the government to ban those items, ban those companies from, dumping their products in the country. And I think that is, that's very powerful if we can do that more easily, and then you can find the products that can be easily replaced, the single-use products that can be replaced with reusable products, and then work to see which products can't be easily replaced, and then finding alternatives for those, I think is really important here. And again, it all comes down to the decisions our government makes and whether they give the subsidies to the oil companies. In 2015, as the film shows, you have that US senator that was a member of, some kind of oil company, and then he was a senator, and then he voted for the subsidies for these oil companies, which I think is a huge issue, that the people that are in charge of making these important decisions are also have their pocketbooks in the oil companies producing, this raw resource that then turns into that plastic bag. And it's a huge issue. Frac sand mining, how that impacts the West is just as impactful in Wisconsin, because we're producing the open mines that produce that silica sand that we ship over to them, that they shove into the ground with 400 other odd chemicals that they don't have to disclose, that are giving people cancer. They can't even, then they have to use a plastic water bottle because they can't even drink their own well water. And it's just a vicious cycle, I think, that definitely needs to end. And I think this documentary is putting a face to that issue, which I think is a great thing. And the more people you can expose this kind of education about waste, the better, because then we can start making more zero waste, decisions in our regular everyday lives.
Megen, do you think that kind of an activity would be feasible in Dunn County, to look in our trashes and really kind of identify what corporations are responsible for our major non-recyclable waste streams, or is it kind of too much?
I mean, I think we would have, you'd obviously have to do some samples and make some assumptions based on sample size. We wouldn't be able to certainly go through all of it. You would have to go through a couple of different, days, different times of year. I mean, for us, trash is a very seasonal thing. I mean, it's always there and in some baseline, but what it comprises of does change seasonally. Like right now in the spring, it's oftentimes a lot of clothing. People are, cleaning out their closets, yard waste and, organic material from our yards is a huge thing in the spring. We move towards Christmas time, Thanksgiving, Christmas time, you have a lot of extra food waste. You have extra packaging from presents and wrapping paper, and you're having all of these extra gatherings. So that changes that. You get a huge influx of cardboard boxes, past Christmas time. Um, Beverage season, more beer is drank in the summertime, so you have more of the aluminum cans, the more of the glass bottles, more of the wine bottles, etc. So some of that changes based on the season and what people are doing. I think doing some waste audits, and we were working with Abrina and Arthur, and we were hoping to do one this spring, right as all things coronavirus kind of shut that down, unfortunately. But we're hopeful we'll have a great protocol so we can, resume that this summer or fall, and get some of those waste audits started, getting some of that baseline data. I'm a big data person. You can't really do anything, make decisions, make change based on data. You can throw a number out there, but unless you have a number to compare it to, it's hard to know. And there are so many things that factor into that. But yeah, I think it's feasible to at least do some waste audits and make some broader assumptions based on what we see in those audits.
Yeah, I want to pick that up. I'm thinking that project might be something that we hit up multiple times over the next couple of years to really get that information. Just get some students out and actually get them counting what our trash is made up of.
Well, and I think just being aware of your trash. We're all stuck at home right now. What a better time to put a piece of paper on the counter, and every time you throw something in the garbage, write it down. And then look at what it is for 24 hours. I even did that earlier this semester, helping out at Stout, reading a book called Garbology, which is equally as depressing. If you're looking to continue your depressing time here after watching this film, highly recommend reading Garbology then.
It's a good book.
It is a good book. It is worth reading. But yes, it's equally as depressing as this film was. But doing that waste audit, even for myself, someone who works in the solid waste industry and recycling, everything was plastic. From your dental floss to your, salad bag that you have to everything. It was Kleenexes and plastic, essentially, is, what I all threw away. And all types of plastic that we can't recycle. It's not recoverable. It's not reusable. It's not any of it. So that was really eye-opening for us, like how much we really threw away. And I think just so many people are not conscientious about their garbage. I throw it in the garbage and I take it out to the curb, or I take it to the drop-off center and it's gone, and you don't think about it any more than that. But I think that's the first step in any sort of change base, is just being aware of what you have and what you're doing. And then you can assess from there where are the changes I can make, where are the low-hanging fruit, that I can go after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that is a great message for U.S. companies that are producing these plastics that are non-recyclable. Because if you can, essentially collect a resource at the curb, then there's some profit for that, and you can move away from being so wasteful. But when the products that are being produced, can't even be recycled, then it's all just landfill. And thank goodness in the United States, we have the infrastructure to support this. Where the huge issue occurs is the third world countries that don't have that infrastructure to support that trash collection and trash disposal. And then, of course, because there's so much of supply of these easily accessible plastic chip bags and such that are just being thrown on these countries. And it's just very sad, because it was an interesting aspect of the documentary when they had the shampoo bottle, that depending on which country you're selling your shampoo in, you don't have to have the verbiage on there that says this is recyclable or you should recycle it or not. So I thought that was very interesting. And
holding our companies accountable in other places to the same standards that they have here, right? Just because it would, so much of this, I think about like, oh, that's a lot of political willpower to get something like that in place, but it would be so meaningful to, like, you have to follow the basic standards everywhere. It's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I had a question for Megan about the incinerators. Is that a thing that with appropriate technology and scrubbing of the smokestacks and things, that a lot of that toxic plume is eliminated from like our incinerator facilities?
Yeah, so with appropriate technology, you can do incinerators relatively cleanly. In the state of Wisconsin, in state code, there is a waste hierarchy. There are seven different disposal options. The first being reduce, then reuse, and then recycle. And then we're moving down into like composting. And then the next one is incineration with energy recovery. The next one is incineration without energy recovery. And then landfill is the last choice. And it's in order of that for preference of what's, in theory, most environmentally friendly. There are only 2 incinerators in the state of Wisconsin. They're both grandfathered in. It would be incredibly difficult to get a new incinerator built in the state of Wisconsin, not only from state code and regulations, but public perception of incinerators is pretty poor. There's been some bad stories, I guess, and bad circumstances, I should say, regarding some incinerators. But as technology has improved with anything, I personally would be all for having more incinerators. No one wants a landfill in their backyard. I mean, not like a lot of people want an incinerator in the backyard, but versus a huge mountain of trash versus an incinerator that at least is providing some energy recovery. Typically they are co-sited next to some sort of manufacturing industry. The incinerator in Barron County in Almena is directly across the street from the Saputo cheese factory. So their steam that they generate from that incinerator helps supply the energy needed at the cheese plant. And then the rest is saved and put out onto the grid as needed. So that's, a kind of a symbiotic relationship there with your industrial partners. And I think it's a good option. Trash isn't going to go away. We talk about zero waste. Realistically, that's not going to be a thing nationwide. Certainly using zero waste principles to reduce our waste. But I think for most people, and most families in particular, it's going to be difficult to be truly zero waste in our country. I think it will always be there. How we handle it, how we process it may change as the technology improves, et cetera. But it would take a huge ideological change to get even to that point, let alone to a zero waste concept across the United States.
Yeah, I think about the shift since the World War II, right? Around so many things, convenience, and so then with the microwave, we always talk about how we're 2 to 3 generations away from people who actually know how to cook from scratch, which I think really leads into Steve's comment about less people buying bulk foods, and it's because they don't know how to do anything with them. That their parents didn't do it, and so they don't. And so much of this is just that we have had a cultural shift. And it's funny how, like, I think about how all of these things are so tightly related. In agriculture, we talk about the cycle of dependency, where you start doing industrial agriculture, and by the time you realize it's a bad idea, you're 2 generations later and nobody remembers how to do the old style of agriculture anymore. And I feel like the plastic, we've gotten into the same path where we used to do things totally differently, and now we're 3 generations later and we have no clue how to go back. And so it's this tremendous cultural shift that would need to occur in order to get people two step away from that. And I think it's happening, slowly, but I'm in a bubble, right? I talk to my like sustainability capstone students and we're all like, yeah, we're changing things, but it's changing things in our individual lives, not broader sense.
Yeah, and I think all these things with the coronavirus, COVID-19, it's been a great almost social experiment of seeing things. So that when this first came out and everyone is going to the store and you walk up and down the aisles of the grocery store and they're like, people are like, there's no food at Walmart. And I went to Walmart that day and it's like, oh, there's food. It's the food you have to cook. I mean, the produce was fully stocked. What was gone was, the macaroni and cheese, the ramen noodles, all the single serve already made for you, frozen dinners were like wiped out, frozen pizzas were gone. But I think the cool part of like there being no bread was everyone was like, oh my gosh, I have this bread maker that I've had in the pantry for years. And all of a sudden people are like, hey, I could make my own bread. And they bought yeast. And all of a sudden you can't get yeast and flour in the stores. And it's kind of cool in some respects of people are cooking. They're trying new things during all this, staying at home. They're like, well, why not try to bake a loaf of bread? They might not have ever done it before. Mm-hmm. So I think that was an interesting social experiment as well, that so many people do not know how to cook or they choose not to cook, is maybe some of it as well. But, there was still plenty of food there. I didn't really change my grocery list at all. I was able to get most of the things, but I think it is an interesting aspect too of our waste habits have changed drastically in the last probably 4 to 6 weeks. And it'll be interesting to see how we come out of this. When stores are saying you can't use reusable bags, as everyone now has broke their habit, of doing it. Or, you go to do a curbside pickup of groceries at Walmart and it's literally like one item in a bag and you have 30 bags when it's just insane. So I'm concerned about how we're coming out of this and the habits that have been broken, or the fear that people have that somehow using a reusable bag is going to give them coronavirus or things of that nature. Moving through that is going to be an interesting time, I think, coming out of this mess.
Yeah, some of the interesting things we've been seeing about that at the co-op is we've been a little astounded that actually our sales are up during this period. I think that's partly because since we have very different supply chains, we actually have some kinds of food that other stores haven't had, like eggs. We have really reliable local egg suppliers and they're not coming from California. So it's a real different story. But, one of the things I always find interesting in the store is that, as Arthur and I were both saying, there is this change going on of what people are buying. And that's reflected not only in the fact that our bulk sales are not really great. Well, right now, bulk in the store is really weird because we had to package all the bulk food because you can't legally sell bulk food right now. But the bulk sales have been, by and large, going down, but the prepared food out of the deli just flies off the shelves. And so we're kind of having to make changes just based on customer demand. The other thing that I thought was kind of brought up in the film that, from my experience, is interesting is how many people think that because there's that resin number and the little spinning arrows around it, that it's recyclable. And of course, a lot of that stuff isn't recyclable. And the other thing we see is this big demand for things like compostable silverware and that sort of thing, which it sounds really reassuring, but it's not compostable in any way that it's actually going to get composted. It has to go into an industrial composting process, which we don't have around here. Well, which we don't have much of anywhere actually in the United States. So it's another illusion.
I thought that the PLA bit was really tremendous. We've got such a tremendous effort at greenwashing occurring, and it's just absolutely everywhere. Like Barbara's, the food brand. I was like, I wonder where that comes from. And I looked it up, and I can't remember right off the top of my head who it is, but it's one of the major food companies, and their organic wing, right, where they just are doing, making with the slightly better ingredients, but it's the same stuff, right? Where they just make it sound like it's from a recipe from some lady's kitchen, and the PLA is the same story, where they're trying to make it seem like be this responsible, biodegradable plastic, but you think about the fossil fuels that go into making corn, and so PLA is essentially, it's got the same fossil fuel pile behind it, possibly even more, because the processing of it is fairly energy intensive. And then the problem of recycling it, if any PLA gets into the stream, it mucks up the recycling stream too. And it, so it's really interesting how hard it is to get to actually understand the right thing. What's the right choice here, right? Which plastic is good, which one is bad, when there's so many of them, and then as a consumer, you're just looking at this wall of plastic, and how do I make the right decision here, especially if I want food now.
It's been one of the big trends, particularly in the organic and natural food industry, is all those little companies that we used to think of as the organic suppliers are all getting schwerped up by major multinational corporations. And so that, you end up seeing a lot of things like organic vegetables coming from China, from companies you think of as little reliable companies, but it's part of Procter and Gamble now, or whatever.
Marianne had a question in the chat about plastic particles, and my first thought about plastic particles is how devious this thing has been, and not like somebody's intentionally being devious, but like the plastic fleece is just such a heinous mess, where at first we were like, hey, this is a great way to recycle our pop bottles into something useful. Let's make all this plastic fleece. But then you start washing that fleece, and it makes microplastics. I saw a research poster at the last year's undergraduate research convention, and it was a young lady from Colorado State who had gone up into the mountains along up in Montana, Colorado, in all of these really far away from everything places, and was finding plastic particles in virgin snow. And it's because this stuff is in the atmosphere, and it winds up being the dust particle that the snowflake forms around to drop. And so we think about this plastic pollution as like, well, I don't live next to the ocean. But if you're washing fleece, you're putting that out into the water, and it's evaporating up because the particles are so darn small. And then the other thing that happens is plastic absorbs pollution. And so then that pollution winds up in the plastic, and so we're just spreading it out all over the place. And so then how do you get out of that situation of this sheer volume of plastic that's in the ocean? And because I was flabbergasted watching that video, and the fisherman is there, and they're talking about plastic pollution. And did you guys notice what his net was made out of? Right? And so the fishing is one of the big sources of plastic. Although I did really appreciate how much of the pellets were shown, right? Because one container going overboard full of those pellets, and it's a fairly significant number of containers that just get lost at sea, right? And so they're just
Yeah.
out and about, you know. And so it really is a dire situation, because we can't live without the ocean, right? That, I mean, like, yeah, that's end of species if the ocean fails. And what exactly is that plastic going to do to the ocean food chain? And that's a real good question. It's called I like to call it the great experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Let me
see.
just chip in here and say if anybody's got any questions, either put them into the chat or just say you want to ask a question. I'll unmute you. We're coming up on 40 minutes here, so I don't know. Does anybody else have anything they want to contribute from the panel?
There's a question from Bradley here in the chat to me, talking about out in California and some other states as well, have a bottle bill, I guess is what it's kind of called in normal terms. Basically, there's a deposit on like an aluminum can or a glass bottle, etc., plastic bottles, and you bring them back to a redemption center. And for every bottle, sometimes it's 5 cents, 10 cents, it varies across the different states, the different materials, and you get paid. You basically have like a lot of them are vending machines that you just kind of put them into, and out pops your money and all of that. Wanting to know if that helps improve the recycling rate in those states, and if so, why don't all states implement this? So it can definitely increase the recycling rate. People definitely, want to get their money back. It's why it's not done more widespread is there are a lot of lobbyists and corporations that are vehemently against this kind of activity, because when you purchase those products in those states, there is an extra, that money is recouped through that. That's the mechanism to fund these programs. And they see that as a tax when it's not technically a tax, but to the general public, the general user, it feels like a tax. And then it's also, it's hard to fund that. So I know like California, I believe, is having some issues funding that program because those laws were put into place many years ago. As inflation comes up, the ability to manage that program, the administration part of those programs continues to eat up more money, not only because of inflation, but the transportation of those, there's not the value in the materials anymore. Recycling markets are widely variable. And the plastics market in particular, as with many markets, follows the crude oil market. And we all know where that's at right now. Which we are just waiting on pins and needles to find out what kind of low price, if anything, we'll get for our plastic. Prices have been low anyways. And now with that negative crude oil price, that's gonna hurt. The markets have been low. We've been waiting with all this coronavirus, COVID stuff. We know the floor is going to fall out. We're slowly waiting. We're seeing it in some items. The one bright spot is cardboard. Pricing has gone up because of the demand for that, but past that, that's not going to offset the losses in the metals and plastics markets. So it'll be interesting to see. We got another couple of questions here. One from Marion. Can non-recyclable plastics be safely incinerated? The film indicated no. So it depends on what your what it is. So the incinerator in Barron can burn tires if they want to. You can recycle them, you can burn them. They are a high BTU value. They do typically try to do more of the tires in the winter when it's trying to keep that temperature up. Incineration, you want to keep the temperature as steady as possible. You don't want large fluctuations. And the makeup of trash is seasonally different, and winter is generally a lower time of trash, lower BTU value of trash as well. I know, so they oftentimes sometimes save up some tires and other things to have as their stockpile for when things get, cool or the temperature gets really cool, they can throw those in there. So yes, you can incinerate other plastics. There is an emerging technology that's kind of coming down the pipe, kind of being pushed really hard in Wisconsin, is called pyrolysis. There's a plant that is very close to being online, if they're not already online, in the Indiana area, and they're pursuing contracts very, very hard on plastic items, that are not the number ones, number twos, number fives, more of those 7s, 6s, 4s, your bulky items, those really non-recyclable plastics, multi-material things, and they use essentially similar to a incineration process. There is some chemical portion of it as well, but then it basically becomes a low-grade diesel fuel that you could use to run a manufacturing plant, or it's not a road-ready diesel or any of that, but there's a big push for that. There's some legislation that came through in the state of Wisconsin in the last year or so that essentially exempts pyrolysis facilities from the solid waste rules, because they exempted them as not a solid waste facility, which many people in our industry lobbied against, because there's a lot of regulations, and for good reason, around solid waste facilities. Certainly pyrolysis would be a great option for some of those non-recyclable plastics. Us in the recycling industry are concerned of what happens to our traditional recycling number ones, number twos, number fives when this technology comes here, especially in times like we have now where there's not a great market for that. Are people going to start sending it to pyrolysis because they can get more money for it? And money is the bottom line, for a lot of things, versus recycling it into the feedstock for our manufacturing industries that they need. And obviously right now, the manufacturing industries for plastic can buy virgin plastic cheaper than they can buy recycled plastic, especially when you consider, even with the inputs that you need on both sides of that, it's, unless they're being forced to have a certain percentage of recycled content in their materials, whether that be legislation or just their company values, there's not going to be that demand for that number ones. So that's our concern around pyrolysis, is what happens to the markets that we already have well established for our regular number ones, number twos, number five plastics. I have one more question here from Catherine. How do you get the information you are sharing tonight out to a broader audience in Dunn County? I'm struck with the various groups that easily use alternatives, such as bringing coolers of water for participants' drinking festivals. Yeah, this is a great question. And the thing that we struggle with a lot is, there are people who are living really great, doing really great things. They're being conscientious of what they buy and all that, but how do you get that message out to the broader people? Through the county, as far as solid waste, we try to use a variety of methods, doing, group talks like this, going out to, libraries, community groups, schools, which has been incredibly sad that this has happened during the spring. This is April and May are my biggest months for education. Surrounding like Earth Day and all of that. That's when every group wants to have this kind of information brought to them. So that's been incredibly depressing to not be able to get out there and do that in person right now. We do a newsletter. Typically we've done it every spring. We have held off for right now with coronavirus. We're hoping to do it later this summer when things die down, hopefully. So trying to do a variety of, print media, our, press releases to our newspapers, and then online things like Facebook, our website. But it's hard because if you're not seeking that information, it's hard to get that information, or even if you're seeking it, sometimes there's an overwhelming amount of information. If you go to the internet or go to Pinterest, you could, you type in zero waste into Pinterest and you see someone has a mason jar and they're like, this is my waste for a year. And it's like, you just turn people off because that person has made choices and changes over a period of several years. They didn't just go from their normal regular waste to a mason jar in 2 weeks. So I think that's overwhelming, and it's really hard to sort through all of that versus making those one small change at a time, and those small changes eventually snowball into larger changes across your life. But that's a thing we struggle with. Print media gets to everybody's house, so you at least see it. Doesn't mean they'll read it, and it's incredibly expensive, which is why people don't do it as often as we used to. It's incredibly expensive to mail things to everybody.
Yeah, the whole issue of print media versus online media is near and dear to my heart, of course, and I'm actually giving a talk at the League of Women Voters next month about that. But and the collapse of the newspaper business in the United States. But yeah, I think it's always difficult. My heart's always a little broken when I go to some kind of environmental meeting and they haul out the flat of Nestle bottled water. It's like, okay, no, first of all, it's bottled water, and second of all, it's like the worst company. And what are we thinking here? But Kathy, I think, that's one of those issues that those of us on the heat committee need to try to figure out too. I mean, those are issues we care about, and they're ones we want to try and teach people about. But and we're in Dunn County, but I don't know how to tackle that either exactly.
I was just thinking that Abrina has gone through a lot of work to kind of get to a zero waste or a more zero waste. What percentage do you think you're at right now?
So I am at least 60% of my waste I only take my garbage out probably once every 3 weeks. So I'm composting and I'm diligently recycling along with refusing. And that has definitely helped me a lot. Go ahead.
We should try and do like make a meme thing for the Facebooker to like do your trash audit. Like this is a great time to start thinking about your waste because you're living with it all the time, and it would like feeling bad about your trash is at least an emotion. It is a good time to kind of dig into some of that stuff and start thinking about it because no better time than now.
Yeah, absolutely. And my goal to my zero waste lifestyle is a 5-year plan. So it's something that is these small decisions that I make every day. And sometimes I do purchase a plastic peach tea or something like that. But it's the overall reduction that, you're working towards being better at it. And I think that's the most important step, not necessarily being able to fit your plastic in one jar, which is my future goal, but I couldn't see myself, jumping to that right away. And I think that it's important to note that, the supply for plastics are driven by the supply for fossil fuels. So I think it is absolutely important that, we do lobby to state legislators and the decision makers of our states and of our country to kind of push for that change in that regulation. And then on top of that, I think this might be appropriate to post in the group chat, but we do currently have a survey going out to all Dunn County residents in which they can give their feedback on if they value recycling, which items they feel that are ending up in their trash that they're not able to recycle, that they would like to recycle. So I'll go ahead and copy and paste that link in here, and I would just, ask everyone here to share that on any form of social media that you have to try to get the most feedback from Dunn County residents. And I feel that would be a great way to reach the larger community of Dunn County. And that way, Megen can give some great feedback on the issues that Dunn County are facing and how they can actually improve their recycling efforts in our county. So that would be make a tremendous difference if we can participate and share that survey.
I think the political thing is really important. We have our local efforts, but I was just, there's been this funny feeling over the last couple of years about how cute George Bush was. And I saw him in there, and it brought everything back from when he was in office, and just about how far he pushed the oil market forward, and how many lives he damaged with the fracking boom and all of this stuff. And it really, it's that we have this money problem in our politics. And until we get that money out of politics, none of this stuff is going to get fixed, because, they've got the money and we don't. And so we have to figure out some way of grabbing that power back. Because it has so many ramifications out into all aspects of our lives. Like I'd say the whole money in politics is why they forced Milwaukee out onto the streets for that election. It just is, it's all this one big pile of cronyism. There's a bunch of words we can toss at it, but that's really where the effect, because we get a bunch of people to change their individual behaviors, and hospitals continue using single waste plastic. What good is that's, then we're minimizing our impact. And so the impact really needs to be the effort needs to be on these the broader level of getting money out of politics, because it.
Yeah, and I did some lobbying this January. I went with our student government and we did some lobbying in Madison, and some feedback that we got from not only the state senators but also their staff was that they were refreshed to be talking to people that were not paid to be there. They were refreshed to be talking to young students that care about stuff and that want to be involved and that weren't paid to read a script and be there and say something. Not that, there are environmental groups and organizations that are nonprofit that are also doing some great lobbying work, and that is important. But I also think there is some personal power that we do have as individuals to go ahead and participate in our democratic process. I think that's very important. And there's also some downside to that as well. When I was there, I was bringing up to one senator about the funding of a green bank in our state. So essentially green banks fund sustainable projects, clean energy projects, that kind of thing. And the first question that the senator had about that was, oh, well, I wonder where they're getting that money from. So it is definitely a question. The first question they will ask is, what is the cost? And that is extremely difficult when it comes to sustainability initiatives, because they're automatically given this label that they are more expensive, when indeed they will save money in the long run. It's all about the bigger picture when it comes to sustainability. And the cost savings are essentially the cherry on top of the environmental savings, and the savings that less people will be getting cancer, less people will be dying. And people are not putting a value on that. They're only putting a value on what can make money. So I think that lobbying efforts by everyday citizens are also impactful and important to participate in.
Yeah, interesting enough. Oh, go ahead, Arthur.
Well, it's just messed up how like nobody ever, you can do this, but nobody ever puts the dollar amount on how much a kid with cancer costs. And it's messed up that our society has to, that my brain even goes to that place. That like, oh, that would be the way to argue with these people about this, is that this stuff is really expensive, not just in the investment in the human being, but and I just like, it kind of sends me off a little bit of a cliff, but it's.
Yeah. And our laws are not also, they're not designed to handle environmental issues where you have a company polluting a community and then the people in that community are getting cancer, suffering from respiratory issues. Our laws are not set up to handle that situation, which usually leads to the companies getting away with it. And it's almost like they're, I guess they're lying and doing it on purpose is what it feels like. I guess we don't know the exact internal conversations that are happening, but these large companies have to recognize the issues that they're creating.
Well, I mean, this has been happening for so long. When you think about like the Bhopal disaster in India, where just they poisoned a boatload of people, and never really had to take responsibility for it. And you know, like it just is more of the same stuff. Like the you know, the EPA has been bought and paid for. You look at the numbers that they presented with like 85,000 potential pollutants, and 85 of them are on the EPA's watch list. You know, it's really, it's just, I don't know, it's obvious at this point, like what has happened.
And interesting enough, kind of circling back to the money part in our politics in our state government. So the county and all counties receive some money to help offset their recycling expenses through a grant program. It's funded through the Environmental Management Fund, which that fund through the state, interestingly enough, is funded based on fees from every ton of garbage that is tipped in a landfill in the state of Wisconsin. So every ton of garbage has a just under $15 fee added on to whatever that landfill, public or private, charges per ton. And $7 of that fee goes into the Environmental Management Fund. And then that fund helps fund the recycling programs across the state, helps fund the clean sweep hazardous waste programs, and a variety of other things. Through the years, it's been rated for other projects, not necessarily in the environmental realm, or things that are very much a stretch of what an environmental management fund would be. But the irony of people in our industry, when we talk about working towards people to reduce their waste, is we are essentially cutting off our funding source. If we effectively do our jobs and teach people to reduce our waste, then there are less tons of trash being disposed of, which means less money in the Environmental Management Fund, which then leads to less money coming to the local boots on the ground who are working the recycling collection, the processing, and all of that. So it's somewhat of a lethal thing to be going to this reducing waste, and yet we know it's the right thing. And we've talked about it for years of how do we fund this program that isn't based on the amount of trash, and you know, how do we become sustainable? How do we develop markets, create the demand for these products, so it can be sustainable without that money flowing in? So I always have thought, in my 6+ years in this industry, that that's one of the biggest oxymorons of our entire industry in the state of Wisconsin, is that's how we fund recycling, is based on the amount of trash that we throw away.
That always strikes me as one of those things, like, you know, you'd put it in an ironic novel, but because it's so strange. Well, we're coming up here on an hour in this discussion, so probably we ought to try and draw things to a close and see if anybody else has any questions. Otherwise, I think, you know, what I drew from this was a couple of things. One of them is we have a problem we really can't recycle our way out of at this point, and that, you know, not to undercut the importance of recycling, but we need to do other things as well. And it just, what really struck me about this was that we are now in this area of using up, of making plastic solely because we got so damn much oil that it has to go somewhere, and the oil companies need to find a use for it, and plastic is what they're going to do. Especially as, you know, we stop putting so much of it into our cars and doing the traditional uses of it, which also has to happen. Abrina, go ahead.
That's going to be a really interesting continuing problem, as assuming our society moves away from oil, right? That then the price of oil goes down, and so then it's more freely available. And so we've got ourselves in a really sticky economic situation that because we've been so hooked on it for so long. And that was one of my main thoughts watching that movie, is like, we're heroin addicts. That's our whole society is just like tracked, marked up, you know, super addicted to this stuff. And it's the same level of a problem for us to start getting off of our plastic as a junkie to get off of heroin, you know. Yeah.
Abrina, you have a closing thing to say?
Yes, I would just like to remind everyone of the resources that are available surrounding more sustainable action. So, in dedication to Earth Week,
You're real quiet.
Yes? Sorry.
Your volume dropped out. You got to get closer to your microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I just want to remind everyone of the sustainable resources that they do have online during this time. So if you go ahead and take a look at the sustainability website at UW-Stout, there are actually several videos on that website created by students. One was from me, and I made a video on how to make your own laundry and dish soap. So this is something that, you know, everyone here can do. It's very simple, it's cost effective, and it is a great way to clean your clothes chemical free. And this is just one small action that we can take to reduce our plastic waste. So yeah, I encourage you all to, you know, just take the time to educate yourself about sustainable options and what action we can take here online today to make a positive impact, because of course this stuff is you know, quite depressing and very sad, but there is stuff that we can do to address that. So I'd just like to remind everyone of that. And that's all I have.
It reminds me what's old is new again, right? Because you know, making your own soap is just such a classic thing that everybody used to do.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think a lot of people are kind of doing what your grandma did, you know, like clean with vinegar. You don't need anything more than vinegar. Just a bottle of vinegar and you can get your house clean. You know, yeah, making your own soaps, using cloth diapers if you have a small child. They're really not that scary. I did it. I survived. I'm still here. You know, it's a lot of that really does this, and it is a depressing topic, and it can be easy to go down the rabbit hole of everything is awful and people are awful and they're never going to change. And there are a certain segment of people that will never change. And I think for me personally, we have to at least somewhat ignore that fact of they're not going to change their behaviors. Those aren't the people that we're looking to change here. You've got the bell curve of people. You know, there's a large portion of people that could change, would change if the economic incentive was there, if it somehow benefited them, if someone helped walk them through it. So I guess my message is take that actionable step, no matter how small it is, find an actionable step. And it's kind of true of anything in life. When you're feeling sad or depressed or any of that, find an actionable step to make that change. And then once you make that change, you know, share it with your neighbors or, you know, that kind of thing. If you make your own laundry soap, you know, bring a container over to your neighbors, be like, hey, do you want to try this? It's really cool. You know, maybe we could buy a bunch together of the materials and make it and split it, or whatever that is. You know, making not only that step, but sharing that step with the people in your circle. And, you know, they may think you're crazy. They probably will at first. but eventually you'll get to where you're talking about it at Christmas dinner about, you know, the new soap you're making and, you know, why it's so cool and all the rage. You know, or they'll see your container of, you know, dish soap when you're washing dishes after a family gathering. And they're like, oh, what's this? It's not Dawn dish soap, you know, it's not bright blue. That's not natural. And, you know, you can have that conversation. So find those ways to make that that change, and then sharing that change. And always feel free to reach out. I'm always here, the Dunn County Solid Waste Program. You know, give us a call, send us an email, etc. We'd be happy to help walk through any of those things.
Those traditional skills can be really handy. I've been finding being able to make my own wine and beer has kept me from bringing in lots of bottles to the house because I have a keg, and less trips to the grocery store too. So, okay, I think maybe we're done here. So I think maybe I will say goodbye to everybody and thank you to the panel for participating, and all you good citizens who've come in to participate. That's great too. What is this big long link? Oh, I see. Okay. Thanks a lot. I'll be putting up a recording of some of this, and we can get an article with a bunch of links. So thanks for all coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, for organizing.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
It's really very good.
Excellent, excellent information and inspiration.